Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. So welcome to the ASCILITE Live webinar series for May 2023. This one was actually supposed to happen a little bit earlier this month, but we sort of pushed it off. There are a few public holidays there in April, so we pushed this one off. So it's late May 2023. But despite that, we're really excited to have James here to talk about his presentation. And just to give you a bit of context, you can see the title of the presentation there on the slides. But just to give you a bit of context, James is here because he and his two co-authors, who I'm sure will mention to you when he starts presenting, they won the best, and correct me if I'm wrong here, James, the best concise paper at the ASCILITE 2022.
It was a very big surprise. I didn't know that I was winning any awards, and so actually neither myself nor any of the authors were present to accept it, face-to-face or digitally.
Oh, there we go. Well, look, despite that, we're very excited for you, and we're so excited for you that we say to you and all the authors of those papers, hey, do you want to come along and give us a repeat of the presentation that we can record and ultimately put up on the ASCILITE YouTube website, as well as, of course, have live guests here as well. And so we've got some live guests in the room, but we'll also record the presentation. I'm going to do the little bit of plugging bit here, and then I'm going to hand over to James. So first and foremost, as always, I want to acknowledge the country that we're all on and the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we're meeting, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. As I was saying, James, and you can probably tell from my background that I'm actually at a cafe, just dropped my car off, but I am still on Ugumbear land here on the Gold Coast at the moment. So I'd like to acknowledge those elders, but also the elders of all of the lands that you're on as well. Here's a little slide that plugs ASCILITE for you. I'm going to shuffle this window over here to remind you of the various things that ASCILITE does, which includes obviously the live webinar series, which you can see on the slides right there, but also the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology, the annual conference, which is where James won the award in co-authors in 2022, and various other things. I want to call out in particular that we are at the moment in the process of planning the research school for this year. So keep an eye out for that. And we are also thinking about other things that we might do in terms of the podcast and the blog. And in particular, I'm really interested in anyone that has any blog posts. So if you do, please touch base with us and let us know. We'd be very interested in having a chat. The other thing that I'm going to plug before I hand over to James is the ASCILITE conference for 2023, and all the windows are in the way, so let me shuffle that one over there. And this conference is now calling for papers. It is in New Zealand this year. We're all really excited to go to New Zealand, go to Christchurch in particular. And I think that is actually the convention centre that we're going to have the conference in, the TPA conference convention centre in Christchurch. So we're looking to be a big conference and a very exciting conference. And the theme is people, partnerships and pedagogy. So now's the time. Start thinking about your concise paper or your full paper for the 2023 conference. And more than happy to have a conversation with anyone about that. Otherwise, if you go to the website, which is on the bottom of the slide there, 2023 conference.ascilite.org, you can read the call for papers and also work out what you're going to present this year. And you never know, you might end up winning the best paper award, and then you get an email from me asking you to do one of these in 2024. But by far and away, ladies and gentlemen, the star of the show is presenters who, as I said, won the best concise paper in 2022. And so I'm not going to steal too much more of his time, and instead I'm going to stop sharing with my one screen here at the cafe and hand over to James, who should have the ability to share, so that he can tell us a little bit about his paper for 2022. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Michael. I admire your courage doing this in a cafe on a laptop. I find myself incredibly handicapped when I do anything without my two-screen webcam, microphone, headphones kind of setup. It makes it a lot more difficult, especially when you're relying on a dodgy Wi-Fi connection. So hopefully everyone can see the main presentation slide now. So thank you once again for the invitation to present here. I haven't really engaged too much with ASCILITE in the past. Actually, last year was pretty much the first time I've really done anything with the ASCILITE people, but I am enjoying it quite a lot. I'm part of the community mentoring program at the moment, and yeah, I'm really quite enjoying the experience so far. So this presentation I delivered online in the ASCILITE Connect conference in December last year. And I'm very happy to be able to represent it this year because anyone who might have actually been in attendance might remember I ran out of time quite badly. I really did not run according to Danny's schedule, so I actually couldn't present the entire entire thing last year. So being able to do it again this year is quite good. So the project that I'm going to be presenting is on using recorded audio feedback. And really, I don't think this is a new thing. I think this has probably been around for quite a while, even going back a long time. I've read papers of people doing this, but I'll talk about the project in more details in just a second. A little bit of context. So I'm a lecturer in biochemistry and genetics at the La Trobe University down here in Melbourne, and both of my colleagues are also in the same department. We all are biochemistry or genetics academics, and to a large degree, our work is mostly really heavily based in the molecular field. So it's interesting that I've kind of come to this particular project, which has actually nothing to do with our disciplinary background. I know that Michael's already done an acknowledgement. However, I'd also like to do my own just very quickly. So acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today. So for me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and of course, any other Indigenous peoples who might be joining us today, and also towards the lands that you may be meeting on or joining this online meeting. So we'll talk a little bit first about feedback. Feedback, as anyone who has any degree of kind of experience in teaching and learning would know, is an incredibly important part of the assessment process. So when we assess our students, providing feedback on their submitted work or their performances, their projects, everything that they do is a key component of assessment. It's almost, there's no point in doing assessment unless your only reason for doing so is to rank the students somehow. There's no point in doing this assessment if you're not really going to be providing feedback. And there was a lot of work done a while ago by Bowd and Malloy, or particularly Bowd, who did a big kind of nationwide project on assessment in higher education in Australia. And he came up with a list of principles, but three of the most important ones I've listed here about providing feedback to students on assessments is that it should be informative and supportive. It shouldn't just be a critical kind of analysis of what they've actually done. It should also support their future learning, and it has to have enough detail in that to support kind of developing their skills and future submissions. It has to be done in a timely fashion as well. And I know this is something that I struggle with and everyone struggles with, getting back comments on essays, reports, all of the submitted work that our students submit to us. Getting that back within a reasonable time frame is really quite a challenge. And I think this is only becoming more so as workloads seem to be creeping upwards. The last point here is that the feedback should be tailored to the student themselves. So I know that a lot of students will probably make generally the same sort of mistakes, or they will require generally the same type of feedback, but the feedback that we do provide to the students should be in some way tailored to their situation. So they don't all make the same pitfalls. And so you have to really make sure that that feedback is kind of identifying the specific aspects of their submitted work that you really want them to improve on. So enter recorded audio feedback. So the recorded audio feedback, in terms of my definition for it, is just making a digital recorded audio file that the student is able to access in any fashion. So this is either recording it into a recording program, sending it to the student by email, or in some cases, recording directly into a tool that's available to the student via their learning management system or some other system that they have access to. So for my case, I was using recorded audio feedback, and this was embedded into our LMS. I started looking into the literature on this, and there's been quite a few different studies that have found that recorded audio feedback has been noted to be more detailed. So in terms of just counting the raw number of words spoken in a recorded audio file compared to the normal amount of written comment feedback, generally written audio feedback provides a lot more information, at least in terms of just the number of word count. Sorry, that was my second point, really. The more detailed, I guess, first point is also that the actual feedback that itself is provided is more detailed as well, not just kind of quantitatively, but also qualitatively. Another interesting observation was noted a few years ago in the pharmacy discipline, that the type of feedback provided by recorded audio is also different. So when you imagine yourself providing feedback to a student, they found that people provide a different tone of feedback when it's recorded, when you're recording your voice, compared to writing it down, which I think some of us can imagine, getting out the big red pen and underlining things and writing things in, capital letters if you are getting particularly passionate about it, compared to actually kind of yelling through a microphone at some student that's not even present. It's easier to imagine how there would be a different type of language and tone in that recorded feedback compared to written feedback. And there have been some people, or some studies, I should say, that have found that this can lead to greater student performance, but this is fairly contested. So I decided to start using recorded audio feedback in my teaching. My teaching largely involves blended modes of delivery, where our lectures are delivered as pre-recorded videos, and then there are complementary face-to-face workshops running every week where the students consolidate on that lecture material, and it operates in what I would usually kind of think of as a flipped model. So the students should review the lectures before coming into class, and then we go through kind of applied problems and problem-based learning inside the workshop classes. So I decided to use recorded audio feedback for a genetic subject in our third year and our second year biochemistry subject, where the students submit a 1,000-word report. The topic of the report varies between the subjects, but it is a large written assessment. And really, you could probably apply this to any discipline. It's very agnostic of whatever you're actually trying to teach. In terms of how I implemented this, I was using the embedded Turnitin Studio over here. If you click into the Turnitin Studio, if you have access to it, you'll see that as part of your instructor feedback, you have this option to record up to a 3-minute message inside Turnitin Studio. The student can download this feedback as well. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't provide the option to kind of do very much other with it. You can re-record it and delete it as many times as you want, and the student can download it, but that's pretty much the extent of what you can do for playing around with it. So for this written assessment in both of the subjects, I provided a series. I provided feedback in the form of recorded audio feedback, as did the co-authors of the study, and I also provided feedback which was through the Turnitin quick marks, which are kind of non-personalized, kind of quick drag and drop style feedback, where you have like a pool of feedback that you can just drag over to the student's work. So the aims of the study were kind of to help or to evaluate what students really thought of this feedback in terms of its convenience, accessibility. I know that some of this has already been studied by different other studies, but I wanted to really focus on my cohort of students, the level of personalization, and then kind of further along that, having explored this a little bit through a survey, I wanted to actually have a subset of the students interviewed in order to get, I guess, a more in-depth view and try to kind of tease out some of the finer details of what they felt about having recorded audio feedback. So we had about 23% of our students respond to it. 135 students were invited to it. I haven't got the full results of the survey here. There was about, I think, 9 or 10 different survey items all up, and the students were able to choose from disagree to strongly agree to most of them. And so these are kind of the highlights. So in general, in terms of the things which I found that recorded audio feedback was probably less able to do, is that the students were probably less likely to access recorded audio feedback than written feedback, which makes sense because there are more technological implications in having recorded audio feedback. The student needs to have speakers on whatever device they're using. So if they're doing a lot of things on their phone, maybe they can't hear it very well, and potentially also having kind of a quiet study space as well. They might not be able to concentrate to listen to feedback. So this kind of makes sense to me as well, that potentially students would feel a lot less able to access this feedback compared to written feedback. It was also kind of on the borderline whether or not they were more likely to incorporate this feedback into their future work, kind of about 50% there. And then we had some other kind of interesting results on whether or not they thought that the audio feedback was more detailed. Only 65% of students kind of agreed to this statement, which is still a majority, but not I would say, a clear majority. And then also not necessarily a clear majority on those that actually preferred the recorded audio feedback to written feedback. I think a lot of students probably preferred just kind of easily scrolling through their feedback and not having to mess around with listening to a full minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes of feedback to actually get to the part that they wanted to get feedback on. The most outstanding, I guess, results from the study was that most of them found the audio feedback convenient and easy to access. So I guess there's a little bit of confusion here. They did find it convenient and easy to access, but they were less likely to still access it compared to written feedback. So even though it's easy to access, written feedback is still easier, I guess is the message from that one. Find written feedback more personal. There was very clear kind of overwhelming majority of students that really did feel like it was a personal experience to listen to this feedback. And also a large majority found it clear and easy to understand. So after running through the survey, we did get a subset of students to do a semi-structured interview. The majority of the interview questions were probing the same, I guess, similar questions to what was in the survey. And then afterwards, we took the open comment fields from the survey as well as the interview responses, and I went through and coded these using thematic analysis. So basically just going through, first of all, through all of the data, trying to organize it into a few different codes, and then with the aid of the other study authors, I collapsed it a little bit to kind of come down to this list of about 10 different themes and sub-themes. So we've got proximity, so anything that had to do with personal, the feedback being personal or having any kind of emotional response, I grouped together. Anything that had to do with the student's understanding or being able to recall that feedback was grouped together. The quality of the feedback being more detailed or being better able to justify their grade was grouped together. And then there were a few different technical or practical elements here that I kind of grouped together under the theme of delivery. So anything that had to do with how easy it was to navigate the feedback or listen to it, access it, and any technology issues. So looking at, I guess, just the number of codes that came up, this is one way to present the information. The most frequently applied codes were the ones here for practicality, personalization, emotional response, and kind of the amount and detail of the feedback quality. There were kind of, the others here are a little bit more minor, but those four were pretty much the big ones in terms of the frequency that those codes were applied to the data. So just to kind of go into it in a little bit more detail with hearing what the students actually had to say, in terms of the practicality of this, one of the things that I wasn't expecting the students to comment on was that they thought it should be easier for us, or they commented quite frequently that it should be easier for us to provide them feedback. So they are actually thinking about our workload in some respect, and I'm guessing that their reasoning, you can kind of see it here in this quote, is that if we use this, maybe they'll be able to get their feedback quicker in the future, although that may not be the reality in practice. I can talk about that a little bit more later on. Some students also pointed out that the tone of the feedback was different. This is something that was also noted in the literature, and this was mentioned a few times, that the student didn't think that the marker would give them as much criticism if they were listening or providing recorded audio feedback compared to written feedback. So yeah, there were a few different things noted in terms of practicality. The big one was generally that the student just thought it should be easier for us. There were a number of students who also commented that the feedback was more detailed. I've got a lovely quote here from one of the students that they felt that they actually had feedback that they could really use and kind of support their future submissions, which was really nice to hear, because often I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over every semester and it never quite gets through, but maybe hearing it might lead to the students to link that feedback to what they're actually doing more easily. And a lot of students also wrote kind of very brief statements about the feedback being more comprehensive, more detailed, having a greater depth. And so this was kind of a large number of the cases for codes being applied to this theme. One of the other things I wasn't expecting was some of the cases where students mentioned in their feedback that they had a slightly different emotional response, and the big one for that was for softening the blow of criticism. So some students didn't think that we would provide as much critical feedback if it was being recorded verbally. And another couple of cases, the students mentioned that even in the cases where we were providing critical feedback, the emotional blow of hearing that was slightly softer because you could hear the tone of voice that it was being supplied in. So just hearing a voice providing some constructive criticism seemed to be different to having it written down, where you kind of strip it of that kind of non-spoken element. So that was also quite interesting to see as well, and I think it was something that I was quite pleased to see. The students also kind of had a positive emotional response being associated with the marker. In most cases, the students knew the marker. It wasn't kind of an anonymous third party providing the feedback. So there was a pre-existing linkage between most of the students and the grader, which might kind of change the results a little bit. The biggest one, or probably the most frequent code, was personalization, which was students just saying that it felt more personal. They felt like, I guess they felt more like they were actually being treated as a person rather than as a number, I might say, although none of them actually said that, but it felt more personal to them somehow. So I think just addressing the student at the beginning by saying their name and going through the feedback with them seemed like it was a worthwhile experience, because it gave them more of maybe an emotional connection or a personal connection to that feedback. So in some cases, this was linked to having more detailed feedback and a better understanding of what that feedback actually entailed. So overall, there was a pretty good high satisfaction of students with this feedback. I should mention though that this study didn't really compare audio versus written. I did, in my initial applications for ethics to do this study, try to do a cohort study where I could split up the students into like a written cohort and an audio cohort, but it wasn't seen as being an equitable kind of experience for them. So the way I went around this was having the students kind of reflect on their previous previous experiences where they've received written feedback rather than doing a direct comparison within my subject. But I think that would still be an interesting one to do if we can do it, if it could be done over a kind of multiple cohorts and years. It seems like this study supports a lot of the previous literature about recorded audio feedback being seen as more detailed and more personal. And I was very interested to see that many students also had this kind of difference in their emotional response to the feedback as well. The main, I guess, take-home message for everyone here and anyone potentially listening to the recording is that I think this is a useful tool, particularly in cases where you have blended or online learning and you're really struggling to connect with the students, because having a recording of the grader's voice in providing this response, even if the responses are very similar to what might be written down, I think it does maybe foster a little bit more belonging within the subject and the kind of learning community compared to what might be there otherwise. And yeah, this definitely helped with some students who I might have only seen very rarely in a face-to-face class, but could still interact with them fairly freely because they still felt like I was connecting with them through this feedback. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the project. Thank you all for listening so patiently through that. Guess that took about 25 minutes compared to the 15 minutes I had, or 12 minutes I had last year, so no wonder I went over. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have about how we went about it or anything else.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, James. So yeah, while people think about if they've got any questions, and if you do, feel free to drop something in the chat. I'm happy to relay the question for you, or just open your microphone or put up your hand and James. While you're thinking about it, a couple of things, James. First and foremost, this feels like a full paper. You should have submitted this as a full paper. I think. Yeah, I think it's got legs as a full paper. I don't know if you did or not, but then you would have had 25 minutes. And maybe this is Michael doing his plug for ASCILITE. Maybe for 2023, you could do some more data analysis and put in a full paper. I think it's really interesting.
I have to admit one thing though. Those assessments have changed since last year in light of certain technological developments. So it's still possible to do it. I just might have to rejig a few things because at least for the biochemistry reports, they've turned into recorded audio presentations, but the recorded audio feedback would still be, I think, completely viable for that in a different format, maybe even more so.
Interesting, because one of the questions I had for you, Jennifer in the chat first and foremost says that one of the academics she works with really like this way of providing feedback to the students, and I've had other academics say the same thing to me. I find it really interesting. So you're saying that the assessments have now changed to audio that they submit.
One of them has changed, yes. So the third year subject still uses a report format, but the second year subject now has transformed into a recorded audiovisual presentation.
So tell us a little bit about that. Why did you decide to change?
This was I would fully admit to being a somewhat knee-jerk reaction to generative AI.
Oh, interesting. How do you find that works better? Because that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you, is why, if you're giving them audio feedback, why not give them an opportunity to submit audio or video to you as opposed to a written report? I know it's early days, but
I've seen a lot of people recommending. I've read probably more in the literature about offering students alternatives for doing different forms of assessment. I think the main challenge for me is moderation. So the second year biochemistry subject is taught at 3 campuses onshore. It's also taught in Bendigo, Albury, Wodonga, as well as in Singapore. So having consistent and fair grading across these different forms of assessment would be extremely difficult. It's already challenging for written assessments.
That actually leads into a a comment that Jennifer made, and then she's actually got a question as well. She says,
moderating
"Do you
recorded
think-"
audio feedback. Yeah, that's a
Do you
good
think
one.
this only works for experience markers? And then the other question is, how do you moderate the recorded feedback?
So
Are they related?
I would agree that experienced markers would probably find it more easy. The thing about the moderating the feedback is that you can help with this a little bit. You can help scaffold the feedback process by writing out a little bit of a template or script for them to follow. So one of the markers for this, I didn't do 100% of this. Katrina and Fiona also did part of the work, and we were following a similar script where at the start we would introduce ourselves, would say, we're marking your written assignment, whatever it is, before kind of going through, and I told everyone to follow my my approach of the sandwiching technique, where you go kind of positive feedback, negative feedback, positive feedback, and do the kind of proverbial sandwich, and then at the end you kind of have a general overview. In most cases, I think the recorded feedback was fairly consistent, although there were one or two responses in that survey where it seemed like, I don't know, one of us maybe were a bit tired that day and we weren't putting as much enthusiasm into the recorded feedback process. So it is difficult to be really consistent with that. I think for having a rough script for markers to follow is a good starting point, though.
Yeah, I also wonder whether, to Jennifer's point, whether experience markers really helps, with more consistent feedback.
It helps with everything.
Yeah, in my unit, that having experience markers on the other campuses really helps, because I hardly need to moderate what they're doing at all, because we all are on the same standard already,
Yeah.
Sylvia asked you about the equity question. What about
Yes.
students that have hearing difficulties? Do you have captions, or do you just write something?
I was somewhat fortunate, I would say, in that one of the students who was going through last year was, I'm not sure what the severity of her hearing impairment was, but I think it was close to deafness, and she relied on a hearing implant. I've still provided her with written feedback, and I emailed her directly afterwards to ask her if she'd had any difficulties in kind of understanding or in interpreting the feedback. She said that she said that it was okay, but I also kind of provided her with a dot point summary. I would say that the equity point is completely valid, and that there could be a number of students, not just hearing impaired students, potentially also ESL students as well, who might struggle a little bit more with having that mode of feedback. So that might have played into why it wasn't kind of overwhelmingly preferred by a lot of students, because of various kind of circumstances that meant that they couldn't interpret it as easily.
I'm going to take sorry, go ahead, finish.
No, that's it.
I'm going to take a pause just to see if anyone has any audio questions. I'm happy for you guys to open your microphone and ask. Otherwise, I have another question to James. So I'll just give it a moment. And of course, feel free to raise your hand as well. That's the other option. Well, that's okay. If you want to keep typing in the chat, that's fine. I'm happy to relay the questions for everybody. I did have another question for you. It's a tricky one, James. I was surprised at how many students it felt like there was a dichotomy between, I loved listening to this feedback, but almost this hesitation that this feedback was something that they wanted to use in the future. And to me, that was reflected very much by them, a lot of them saying, I don't listen to the feedback. Do you think that's particular to the audio feedback? Did you get any feel from the semi-structured interviews that it was because, as you said, logistically, it was difficult to listen to the feedback? Or is it more that students, and I'm going to drop them all in it here, students don't understand that the reason we give them feedback is partly to, influence further things? I know that you did have that one qualitative comment from a student saying, it helped me with future assignments, but I was also surprised that less than 50% of them listen to it. Thoughts on that? Maybe unpack that a little bit.
I think it's, largely just because of, the way that, audio feedback or video feedback works. You kind of have to listen to the whole thing, and it's very hard to find the specific feedback you might be looking for if you haven't listened to the file previously. So one of the questions in the semi-structured interview was actually on whether or not the students would appreciate timestamps or things like that, that would say, okay, this part of the recording is dealing with the introduction, this part of the recordings, about this particular figure or something like that. They seemed like that would be a good idea. Unfortunately, with the technology that we're using, the embedded Turnitin Studio, it's not actually a possibility. You could write in the feedback form that, this, start at 45 seconds or something for the introduction, but it would increase the workload associated with doing this quite a lot. A transcript of the recording would be good, and if there was a way of getting that done or in an automated fashion, I think that would potentially solve some of the issues. One thing I was intending to do with this project, but didn't really get to, was assess whether or not this actually was a time saving. And honestly, after doing this for a few years, I would say probably not. It takes you the same length of time to read and go through something properly, regardless of whether or not you're drag and dropping feedback, typing something, within a few seconds, or verbalizing the feedback. It's not really a time-saving tool here. I think it's mostly just for providing that extra quality of feedback, and potentially, because most people can talk faster than they type, maybe more words to help soften that emotional blow of receiving criticism.
Yeah, being a little bit less factual. It's really interesting that the students thought. I love the two first comments that you put up, where they thought it would be easier. They all thought, oh, the academics will enjoy it because
they thought it should make our job easier, which I appreciate them thinking about, but I think it's also a bit of self-interest just because they want their feedback quicker, which is fair.
So in the chat, Jennifer says, but does it reduce the stress of marking? What do you think? Is it less stressful?
No, I would say probably the opposite. So
sorry, Jennifer.
This was another thing I was thinking of as a potential addition. It would probably be a very small study, though. Was actually kind of doing a slightly qualitative study of what the markers thought of this, or kind of getting that other side of the coin. And the problem is that for providing the feedback, you're under more constraints than you would be otherwise. So the students are under constraints of where to listen to the feedback. We're under the constraint of having to be in the right environment to provide it. We can't do this in the middle of a busy office. We can't do this, on the train into work or something. You have to be in the right environment. You have to have at least basic, if not slightly decent, audio equipment to do a quality recording. Otherwise, you're just kind of increasing those accessibility issues.
So do you notice, have you got any interesting anecdotes about the personalization aspect? If I have a diversion just for a moment, I've been doing video lectures for years, right? And I will talk to the students via video live, but also record a video where I'm in front of the class and then put it up on the middle side. I'm sure lots of us do that. I've found that when I teach distance students, they get to know me because they watch me every week doing the lecture. And I've had a few instances where at the end of the term, somebody comes to the invigilated exam, back when we had invigilated exams, and says, hi, Michael, and they want to shake my hand. It's like they know me, and I have literally no idea who they are. You mentioned that they mentioned that personalization was more like that, right? Was there any follow-up from them about that? Have you had any interesting interactions with students that they'll go up in the cafe like they knew you really well? I suppose it's audio, so maybe it's not like that.
I guess it has been interesting for a few students. So that one student who had a hearing impairment in particular, and a few other students, it's led to building a really strong rapport with the students who I guess I was already somewhat connected with. So the ones who I'd never seen before, I think it helped them as well. I never saw them, So I'd never had those instances of kind of bumping into them in the cafe or anything. But for those students who I was kind of, maybe somewhat familiar with, I felt a stronger connection to them. And I also run another program where I get kind of higher level students to act as peer mentors for the kind of lower level subjects. So a lot of the students who are doing the genetic subject I also had them in biochemistry, and quite a few of them agreed, I think partially because of this project, to come back and act as a peer mentor for the second year subjects. So I think it helps quite a lot at all levels of that kind of engagement spectrum.
No, that's really good. It's really interesting. I think angle on that idea of that personalized relationship, and the rapport is a great word to use. I do have one more question for you. I'm going to give the audience another chance. If anyone in the room has another question that they want to type in the chat, or again, as I said, if you want to ask James directly, I'll give you 10 seconds. Well, we're doing well, James. I'm always a big fan of the back channel water cooler style. Type something in the chat. I'm more than happy to be the mouthpiece for people that ask questions, and I think you're doing a great job. So I have one more question for you, and I'll preface this by saying that some of my colleagues did it with a tool called Marco Polo, which they really enjoy. Marco Polo is like a chat tool, but with video. And they raved about using it for doctoral students, looking at a doctoral student's paper or COC draft or whatever it might be, and then giving them some feedback on that via a short video. They were like, this is much better, much more personalized, and much more useful in the similar kinds of ways that you described. What do you think about using it for doctoral students? Do you think that
video feedback instead of audio feedback?
Video or audio feedback, the kind of feedback that you're doing, but for, say, a suggestion that a doctoral student gives us. Do you think it'd work? Or?
I think it would absolutely work. The one main advantage, I think, is that personalization. If I had to point out one big disadvantage of the feedback method, is that if you're going through a document, say a doctoral student sent you their literature review or something, and you need to go through and correct it, audio feedback is very bad at identifying particular parts of a document. So if they've made a really awkward phrasing of one particular paragraph, having to describe the page and line number and exactly where that sentence or phrase is very awkward, and it's just easier to do that using the normal highlighting comment sort of stuff that we do at the moment. What it's usually better at is providing kind of overall feedback, or maybe describing something that's been done in a diagram or figure, because then you can explain it probably more easily. The one thing I usually did with my feedback was go through a few specific major points that I thought each student had done well, and which ones they hadn't done very well, but they were all general points, before giving like an overall impression at the end, and thanking them for their submission. So even the students who were failing or bordering on failing, I still gave them hopefully a little boost at the end, just to thank them for the effort of writing it and submitting it. I never really heard from most of those students, so I don't think they'd probably be very underrepresented in the survey.
That's it. But you hope that that's, even though it's bad news, that the personalization helps, right? You've definitely got student feedback suggesting that the personalization softens the blow. So I guess you'd hope that even with those students that didn't do that well, I don't know, maybe I'm being idealistic.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I really answered your previous question about Marco Polo. I haven't used that, but I think video feedback would be another level of personalization, because then you can see the speaker as well. And I saw very few studies in the literature that actually had evaluated video feedback on assessments. I think it's not it may not be done very commonly, or hasn't really been researched very much.
Well, as you said before, the mechanic of doing it is probably a little bit more difficult for the academics and the teachers. Any last minute questions, ladies and gentlemen? Otherwise, if James has any final thoughts, anything that we didn't touch on, James, that you want to, or anything that came up as you were talking that you maybe want to talk about, or if you...
No, not really. I guess just to reiterate something from previously, even though the type of assessment has changed for one of these subjects, it's become a recorded presentation, and the other subject's going to go through major revisions next year and will likely be radically different. I think this should be appropriate for almost all assessments. Anything that is submitted online, if there is a way to record audio feedback, I think it should be applicable. It really doesn't limit itself to written assessments at all.
Awesome. No, I agree, and that's great to hear that sort of generalizability and that transferability. Okay, well, look, I think we're almost at time anyway, so I'll just say to everybody, if we could all give James a virtual round of applause using the reaction button or whatever it might be. Thank you so much.
Thank
James,
you, everyone,
for your time. And good luck in your CMP journey. And I'm looking forward to hearing how your community mentoring program
I'm with Keith.
goes.
I'm with Keith, so he's keeping us very
okay.
very on track, I would say.
Yeah, Keith is very good at that. So that's awesome news. That's good. Keith is an ASCILITE award winner as well. So you're in good company. He won the Emerging Scholar Award, I think. So thank you so much, James. And you can see in the chat all of the thank yous scrolling up the screen from all of our participants as well. So
Thanks,
thank you so
everyone.
much for your time, and we'll keep in touch. But have a nice day.
I'd like to keep in touch. I see a lot of the things that you're doing with your various IT kind of endeavors, and yeah, we should definitely have a chat at some point.
Send me an email offline. More than happy to have a chat. Thanks, James.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.